All right, my friends, welcome back to the Reisinger build. We got a hot Texas day, a perfect day to talk about rooftop insulation. If you haven't caught up on this house, we're building this house start to finish in partnership with our friends at Builders FirstSource, and we're to the roof insulation stage. That's right, not insulation, outsolation. I'm wearing my big sombrero today to keep the sun off me, and I've got my long sleeves. But you know what? This rooftop insulation is a little bit like putting the sombrero on the house. It's not just for energy efficiency. I don't necessarily do this to keep warm today, but I do it to keep cool, to make sure that that sun isn't beating down on my face and warming me more than I want to be. On this video today, we're going to go through all the nerdy details. Atlas rooftop insulation, ventilation, another over roof, the reason why we did monopoly framing, and how we're forming overhangs on the house. The Reisinger build brought to you by our friends at Atlas. Let's get going.
A Build original series in partnership with Builders FirstSource. The Reisinger build.
Okay, before we jump into the insulation details, let's talk for a minute about monopoly framing. Remember that Monopoly piece from your game board when you were a kid? It was that iconic shape of a house, kind of like what you see here. It's also kind of funny, this is green because of the zip system sheathing. But you notice there's no overhangs on the house, and that was on purpose. Now, we love overhangs. The problem with overhangs is when your rafter tails poke over your sheathing, it's a really tough detail to get all the air sealing right. And here in Texas, slab on grade, I've got a lot of mechanicals going in my attic. I want that attic to be part of the air-conditioned envelope of the house. So by monopoly framing it, you see my zip sheathing on the walls is going up and actually touching the zip roofing. Now I've got a continuous water and air barrier from the foundation all the way to the peak of the roof, nothing interrupting it. And all I have to do is use a simple zip tape to seal that wall to the roof. Everything's nice and tight. Now we said we like overhangs. How do we do that? And why are we doing insulation here? Well, this rooftop insulation is going to make a giant difference on the overall comfort on the house. We talked about that sombrero example a little bit ago, right? Texas houses, you think about houses that were built 100 years ago in Texas, before there was any air conditioning. How did we keep them cool? Well, we kept them cool with big overhangs, big roofs, porches, especially where that sun was facing west, to make sure that sun wasn't beating on the house and making it warm. This insulation is a bit of that same concept. We're doing 2 layers of 2-inch Atlas polyiso. This happens to be AC Foam 2 is the product, and 2 inches has a long-term thermal resistance of 11.4. So 4 inches total is 22.8 R value long-term on the top of the roof. A couple details I want to mention. Actually, walk with me here. The guys did a great job, by the way. It is towards the end of the day. It's almost 4 o'clock, and we've done all the rooftop foam on this entire house, except for this one part of the roof. And if you look at the overhang, or if you look at the cut, I should say, of the insulation, one thing the crew did very specifically is we staggered the joints. Foam will have a little bit of shrinkage over time, and so where that little bit of shrinkage occurs, you want to make sure that we've got a full sheet underneath it. So you can notice all these joints are staggered. They basically put the sheets on a 90-degree angle and then stagger the joints. So wherever there's a cut, that cut doesn't go all the way through both sheets. Pretty straightforward install. You're going to notice when the guys did this, they put a 4x8 sheet down, they screwed it in with some short screws, and they've got a cap fastener. Too Fast makes some amazing cap fasteners specifically for insulation installs. So we use their cap fastener and pretty much a standard deck screw that will fasten that down. Actually, True Fast makes those screws as well in all kinds of lengths. Put the first one down, tacked it in place with those cap heads, put the second one down and tack those down with some longer screws. And then starting probably tomorrow on day 2, we'll have to see how the time goes. And I suspect tomorrow, we're gonna use that stack of 2x4s right there to start forming our overhang. So we've got the monopoly framing, right? We've got a really good air barrier on the outside of the house. We've got a good water barrier with the zip system sheathing. Now that rooftop insulation is really going to take our comfort and the amount of energy that this house gets from the sun way down. It's also going to really reduce the heat loss in the wintertime. This same detail could be used in Minnesota or Alaska, as well as down here in Texas. The only difference would be you would actually want to use more rooftop insulation if you're in a really cold climate. We are still going to be insulating on the inside, so this isn't the only insulation, but like I mentioned, we're just shy of R23 on the rooftop. That's a really big deal. And we framed this relatively economically. We used trusses from Builders FirstSource. The roof trusses went on really quickly. We sheathed it quickly. And then again, we're able to tape that from that green zip on the wall to the brown zip on the rooftop. The only difference in the zip that we're using here is the thickness. When you see the green, that's nominally a 1/2 inch. When you see the brown, that's nominally 5/8. It's just a little bit thicker. A lot of times engineers want a slightly thicker roof sheathing, and that's what we did on this house. Now stay tuned for tomorrow. We'll come back on day 2 here. We're gonna finish our rooftop insulation, and then we're gonna show you our ventilation details. So I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, y'all, day 2 here on our rooftop insulation. 8 a.m. and you can see the crew is just about done with the total roofs. Now remember, this is a 3,700 square foot under roof house, 3,100 HVAC, but we did the garage roof as well because we're gonna do some air conditioning in the garage, space conditioning in the garage, and we also did the roof above the porch because it would have been hard otherwise with the weird levels or to try and leave a little bit of foam out there. So if you think about that, that's a day plus another, I don't know, 90 minutes to finish up this rooftop foam. Not much labor at all. That's very impressive. And honestly, the install materials are pretty inexpensive. We're talking about some 2-inch deck screws, maybe some 4-inch deck screws, and those true fast caps that we talked about. It's really not a lot of material. So this is an inexpensive detail. Let's talk for a second about why rooftop insulation, and then we're going to transition to why specifically Atlas. So first off, the thing I really like about rooftop insulation is this is going to be a complete insulation over the entire body and structure of the house. It's like putting your winter jacket on when you're cold. If you get out of the shower and went outside immediately and you were cold, would you stuff insulation in between your ribs, or would you put a big jacket over your entire body? This is that jacket for the body of the house. It's keeping that heat or that cold from even getting to the structure to begin with. The other thing I really like about insulation, and I always preach, is this is solid state, right? There's nothing to go wrong. There's nothing to lubricate. There's no maintenance. There's no expiration date. You know, I love solar. I love all these other technologies, but they have a limited lifespan. They have things that could go wrong with them. They maybe have some maintenance. This has really nothing it's gonna need to do. And for the lifetime of the house, which I think this house is gonna last for several hundred years, this is gonna be doing its duty. In comparison, you spend extra money on your countertops or your cabinets, they all get ripped out in 20 years, sometimes less. This, for the next 100+ years, could be making a huge difference for the comfort of the occupants. And certainly over time, this is gonna save some massive energy. Now, there's not a case to be made for payback in 3 or 5 years, right? If you think you're gonna move in 3 years, it's really hard to say, oh, you're gonna save this back in your electric bills. But where you will save immediately is the comfort on your house. Stay tuned for a slab top insulation that we're gonna be doing with Atlas later in the project. But let's talk for a minute about why Atlas, why polyiso, and this specific product we use in the roof. A couple things I really like about polyiso, it's the highest R value per inch on the marketplace. There's a lot of other good insulation choices, but for the limited amount of space we've got here, we're 22.8 for that long-term thermal resistance. That's a really high number. Had we used another insulation, we would have been much lower. The other thing is you see how easily the crew wrangles this, right? The guys are handing it up, they're cutting it. It's so easy to work with. That lightweight, I mean, you could handle 10 sheets of this, 5 sheets of this, no big deal. You don't need giant muscles. You don't need to wrangle it. Honestly, it makes it safer to work with, especially when you think about a roof, right? If you're wrangling a heavy piece of insulation, there's just a lot more that goes on out there. This makes the installation super easy. And the other thing I like about it, it's when it comes to insulation, very affordable, very easy to get as well. These guys are really easy to work with. You know, we had a giant semi come and drop off all the rooftop foam and the slab top foam. One delivery, I had everything I need. I stocked in the front of the house for a while. I moved to the garage just because we had a little break in framing, but really easy to work with. So I'm a big fan of Atlas polyiso. Now let's transition to a couple of specific details that I want to point out on this install that might help you if you're going to be doing a similar install. Those cap fasteners, you can see if you look at this garage roof, they're in a very specific pattern. And if you look close, you're going to see the chalk lines. The guys chalk lined for later in the process where we're going to put our 2x4s down, the exact location of the rafters. Now trusses, I should say, my roof trusses. My roof trusses are in 16-inch on center. And if you look closely at that roof behind me, you can see the chalk lines that correspond to those lines. Now, when you look at those chalk lines, you notice there's no caps in that area. We specifically use the caps just into the roof decking. All it needs to do is hold that insulation on temporarily and allow the guys to walk on it without it slipping off. So those caps and those fasteners are honestly just a part of the process, and it just needs to hold it down for 48 hours or so. And then the next step in the process is when we put some 2x4s on there that will run from the eave to the ridge. Those are going to get attached with a really big Simpson product. I'll show you that a little bit later. But again, those caps are nowhere near where the later 2x4s are going to go down. I thought that was a great tip. The other thing I want to mention is when the guys are putting a fastener in, whether it's the deck screws we used on this or later on when we put those big basically lags in from Simpson, we want to make sure that if we miss or we feel like we didn't hit structure, leave the screw in. Don't back it out. If you back it out, we've created a possible air or water leak. Now, I'm not super worried about water leaks here. If it rained tonight, we might get a water leak, but we've got an over roof detail. You remember, we've got a whole nother layer of roofing going on top of this, or I should say decking and then roofing. But we do want that air seal. So especially with those bigger Simpson screws, but also with these deck screws, I told the guys, hey, if you miss or you don't feel like you hit something, just leave it in, abandon that screw and go to the next one. So if we go up in the roof line, in the attic of either the garage or the house, you're gonna see a couple screws poking down in a few places. Not always the best. We wanna be cautious about screws sticking down. It can hurt people who are working in the attic, but we are coming in later with some closed cell foam from Owens Corning, a really cool product I'll tell you about later. But that will cover those up. I'm not worried about it, but if you were worried about that, if you weren't gonna be using closed cell later, you had a ventilated, well, you wouldn't have a ventilated attic with this thing, but if you had some other type of insulation you were putting in, like bad insulation, you could go in with like a Bosch tool that oscillates, cut those screw heads off, and that would be no big deal. But we probably will station a man inside the garage so that when we are putting the big screws in later, that we make sure we actually hit the rafters. If we miss, again, we're gonna leave that, but we're gonna yell up to the guy on the roof, hey, you missed it by an inch, move over 1 inch to the west or whatever that happens to be. So a lot to go here, but let's take a break. Let's let these guys finish off the insulation, and then we'll pick this back up as we start the overhang detail. All right, my friends, welcome back. It is day 3. We got a ton done the last couple days. I think I mentioned earlier in the video that this is, this is using a fair amount of resources, meaning we've got a lot of foam on the roof. But when it comes to the labor, it's going real quick. Now, this is a big part of the process, though, because you can see the guys have started forming the overhang. That's what the saw is doing right now. And that detail for that overhang, I really like. I think it's going to be plenty strong. We're gonna ventilate that soffit, and nobody's gonna have any clue that this is a Monopoly framed house with rooftop insulation. It's gonna look like every other normal house in the neighborhood with a 2-foot overhang on everything. Now, I got the drone going in the back of the house because one thing that honestly I didn't think about super ahead of time was I need to install my skylight curbs early in the process. So I'll lace in this drone footage, but basically what we did was before we put the 2x on the back of the roof, we cut out the foam at least a foot around, cut out the skylight hole. We're working from the inside, and we're making a curb for our Facro skylight that's gonna get mounted on top of the curb. I'm a big fan of curb mount skylights. You've got that extra durability, that extra kind of resilience by having that curb elevated rather than, let's say, doing a deck mount. So we're using a 2x12. We're mounting that right to the zip system at the first layer. Then we'll be able to tape it and use some stretch tape to really make sure that curb is waterproof all the way at that kind of sub roof level. We'll bring that foam back. You can also notice when you look at that drone shot looking down that the guys did a great job. I mentioned it earlier, they've staggered the seams, right? So we don't have butted seams that are going through both layers. They've put that second layer of foam on top of the joints. So if we do get a little bit of foam shrinkage, we're good to go. That's not going to translate through. We're going to have good, solid insulation through all that. While I get the tailgate open, I actually have a special guest on the job site. Let's go grab Justin Pratt, who's visiting me from Builders FirstSource. All right, friends, my mobile job site and my buddy Justin Pratt.
Another day in Texas in July, right? Yeah.
No doubt, man. Thanks for joining me on the job site. Yeah. So Justin, while we got a quiet minute, we're in the shade, we're at my mobile office, let's take a minute and tell these guys a few of the really key features of mybldr.com. You know, my team's been using this for schedule. We've been playing around with the home configure tool. We've been showing some potential people who might buy this house the render so they can kind of see what visually this house might look like. But there's all kinds of functionality, including like, here's the load drop that we just got yesterday, or hey, I need to order this to drop on Monday. How about we do a quick walkthrough? Where do you want to start?
Yeah,
you can use my iPad here.
Yeah, so we got your iPad here, and really to start, you know, just one thing to point out is we're going to load the job, and right immediately in the My Documents tab, we're going to see that we've stored a lot of different kind of file cabinets, if you will, that show you, right, the different pieces of it, and we've been able to put in your marketing package.
Let's actually pull that up. That's the document that we went through at the trades to show, hey, here's where the plumber believes that my lines are going to go through. Here's where my HVAC guy thinks the main trunk line's going through. So I can go back and reference that old documentation, which is here, if I need to verify anything.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, one thing to point out that I think you love is that it's all date time stamped, right? And
yeah, that's a big deal.
We can archive stuff, put it in other folders, and then of course you can set crew visibility to those folders, because obviously there are some things you're not going to want to be seen by a homeowner or a crew member.
That's right.
But we can do that by job delegation, etc.
Sure.
You know, so that is the file bank of that. All of that documentation lives in there.
Let's hit the next tab, which is configured. We can actually, with a potential buyer, with a designer on the job, with an architect on the job, we can run through all this. Here's our main siding, accent, brick and stone roof. Let's change that from this type of system to that type of system, this color, that color. All that's done live right here in front of them. And this also could be done at a home buyer's kitchen table too, right?
Yeah,
it doesn't
super easy and native
done.
to use, and you can go in there and change that. So one other neat thing I like to talk about is you can actually capture screenshots and compare the images, right? And take a look at, oh, what is this configuration? What's this configuration? Because homeowners get in here and get playing with it, and they forget what they're configuring.
That's right.
So again, it's all built into the mybldr.com platform.
So one more time.
The build tab is kind of where the build optimize is, all the pre-construction lives. We do a virtual frame walk model. We probably won't be able to load that here just because our internet's so slow, but if we want to look at that, we can go back to the documents tab. We've stored a folder in here that for the build optimization. And one thing you'll notice here is we have your clash detection report that we did. We were able to then kind of load in the supplemental documents here, right? So all your pull data, you know, by discipline or by trade is now coming through. And, you know, what you'll see is we've been able to lay out everything for here. Of course, you've got the printout of this, but we've done this for all systems and then kind of how they overlay with each other. So,
right, in other words, my reflected ceiling plan overlaid to the trusses so we can make sure that everything can-wise is going to work out with my truss layout, and that was done a long time ago.
You know, and part of BFS, it's important to point out too, is that we've actually structurally solved this. So what you're seeing here is what was delivered to the job site, and that's how it's being built on the job site.
It's the real deal.
Yeah.
Now let's go to the material tab. This is where I can actually order materials. I can verify deliveries. I can look at even a photo from the driver that said, hey, I dropped this zip sheathing package for you for your roof, and here's a photo of it. So if I'm not on the job, I could actually go back and check that photo out and see that zip drop that the driver took a picture of. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, date, time stamping again, right? So you know exactly when it's delivered. And of course, we have our proof of delivery photos all in one platform for you to see.
Yep.
right here and available for you.
That's pretty cool.
The other thing I love is that as home builders, especially small builders, when do we typically purchase? We do it at night after we get home from being on the job.
10 p.m. after the kids are down to bed. And the next tab that I think is interesting to talk about is the schedule tab. You know, this is a pretty robust program. They certainly are lots of options that are way more you know, in depth, but this is really all you need for most builders. It's going to give you a good schedule. And by the way, Justin, we are actually a little bit ahead of schedule on here. We're showing that we're still working on interior, or we're not starting interior framing till the 24th.
Right.
We're actually ahead of schedule on that. So that framing tab is looking great for us. And then talk to me about budget and crews, which I really haven't used a whole lot yet.
Yeah, so the budget tab is there available, and what you're going to see is that any transaction you do with Builders FirstSource is going to automatically drop into here so you can pay your bills. But you can also go in here and add other trade invoices if you're trying to do pro forma budget tracking. And then, you know, I love the fact that if you're using QuickBooks, you can download those transactions to there. And again, have this be it that you're showing pro forma and budget data.
Right.
You go in there, build your budget, set up your allowances, what your costs are going to be, and then you can track it real time by dropping not only BFS invoices in here automatically, but then all your trade invoices in there. And then the last document here, the last tab, excuse me, is the crew tab. And this is where you're maintaining permissions.
Right.
This is where you can have office administration, then you can set in company crew, and then you can begin to bring your subs into this. And as we get into the mechanical stages, we'll be able to give our crews access to the documents and allow them to pull this documentation here, look at that pull data, look at the layout data, and then how we originally designed it.
MyBLDR.com, very robust, available to any builder who's a customer of Builders FirstSource. If you're not currently a customer, what do you guys have, like 500 locations around the U.S., Justin? Something
Last
like that?
I heard we were 550.
550. Yeah. They're all over the place. They've been fabulous to work with. In the pre-planning that we did, all that time we spent prior to actually starting framing has really paid off on this job. Justin, thank you for your partnership.
Thanks, Matt.
Builders FirstSource has been an amazing partner here on the Reisinger build. If you haven't watched all the episodes and this is new for you, go back and catch up on our series. We're having a fabulous time framing a really high performance house on a pretty reasonable budget. Justin, thanks for joining me out on my mobile job site desk here and talking us through some of the options that are available for builders at mybldr.com. Now, if you're not currently a Builders FirstSource builder, they have like 550 locations across the whole US. Go to bldr.com. You can start that process and learn more about these guys. And then once you're a customer, you'll have full access to mybldr.com. Anything I missed there?
Nope, that's it.
Thanks for joining me, Justin, guys.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you next time.